My mom took my inheritance to pay for my brother's wedding. You'll understand when you have kids, she said. I didn't argue and walked away, but when the lawyer got involved, losing my dad was one of the hardest things I had ever faced. He had always been the quiet strength of the family, the one who worked tirelessly to provide for us, the one who always knew what to say without saying much at all. When he passed, I found myself lost in grief, but there was one small comfort. I knew he had left behind a will. He had always been careful with money, making sure that when the time came, my mother, my younger brother, and I would be taken care of. I wasn't expecting riches, but I knew he had set aside something for me. It was his way of making sure I'd be okay, just like he always did when he was alive. The first sign that something was wrong came when my mother called me a few weeks after the funeral. Her voice was oddly cheerful, considering the circumstances. You don't have to worry about a thing, she said. Your father took care of everything. I'm handling all the paperwork. That was the first red flag. My father and I had talked about his will before. He wanted me to be directly involved in the process. But now, suddenly, my mother was taking full control? I didn't press her on it right away. I was still grieving, still trying to process everything. But a few days later, I overheard something that sent my stomach into knots. I had stopped by my parents' house to check on my mom when I caught a conversation between her and my younger brother Ethan. Don't worry about the cost, she said. We have the money now. Your wedding is going to be perfect. I froze in the hallway. My brother's wedding? It was true that Ethan and his fiancée had been planning a big, extravagant wedding, something way beyond what they could afford. But where was the money coming from? A sick feeling crept into my gut. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to ask. I stepped into the room. Mom, I said carefully, what money are you talking about? Her expression flickered, just for a second, before she put on her usual warm smile. Oh, sweetheart, don't worry about it. I'm just helping your brother out. With what? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. With his wedding, of course. You'll understand when you have kids. The room fell silent. I felt something inside me crack, but I didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, I turned and walked away, keeping my anger in check. Because I already knew what I had to do next. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying my mother's words in my head, over and over. You'll understand when you have kids. It wasn't just dismissive, it was condescending. Like I was too young, too naive to grasp the importance of family sacrifice. Except this wasn't a sacrifice. This was theft. The next morning, I went straight to my father's lawyer, Mr. Jensen. He was an old friend of my dad's, someone I had met a few times growing up. When I walked into his office, he looked up from his desk and immediately frowned. I was wondering when you'd come, he said. That stopped me in my tracks. What do you mean? He sighed, rubbing his temples. Your mother came in a few weeks ago, right after the funeral. Said she needed to handle the will privately. She insisted that you and Ethan didn't need to be involved. A cold weight settled in my chest. And you just let her? Jensen shook his head. I told her that wasn't how it worked. Your father's will was very clear. His assets were to be divided equally between you and Ethan, with specific conditions to protect both of you. I leaned forward. So, what happened? Jensen hesitated. She brought in an updated version of the will. Silence. What? I breathed. He nodded grimly and slid a folder across the desk. This is what she gave me. It looks official, but something about it didn't sit right with me. I flipped it open. At first glance, it seemed legitimate. The language was similar to what my dad would have used, and the signatures were in place. But then I saw the most important part, the section detailing the inheritance. The new will left everything to my mother. Not split between me and Ethan. Not even a small portion for me. Everything. My hands clenched into fists. This isn't real, I said through gritted teeth. Jensen nodded. I thought the same thing. But I couldn't prove anything without a formal challenge. He paused, then looked at me seriously. Are you ready for that? I thought about my mother's words, about the way she had dismissed me without a second thought. About the way she had used my father's money, my inheritance, to fund my brother's wedding. I looked Jensen in the eye. Yeah, I said. Let's do it. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove around for a while, trying to cool off, but it was no use. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel too tightly, my thoughts racing. I had hoped, really hoped, that I was wrong. That maybe my mother had just shifted some money around, made some questionable decisions, but nothing this serious. But she had rewritten my father's will. That wasn't just greed. That was fraud. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, my anger was barely contained. I didn't even knock when I stepped inside. My mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she sorted through a stack of wedding invitations. My brother, Ethan, was at the dining table, casually scrolling through his phone. Neither of them looked the least bit guilty. "Why don't you tell me about the new will?" I said, my voice tight. My mother didn't even flinch. She glanced up at me with that same infuriatingly calm expression. "Oh, honey, you talked to Mr. Jensen, didn't you?" I dropped the folder onto the table in front of her. "Yeah, I did." Ethan barely glanced up from his phone. "What's the big deal?" he muttered. I turned to him, my frustration boiling over. "The big deal is that Dad left us both an inheritance. And Mom," I turned back to her, my voice hardening, "decided to erase me from it." For the first time, her expression wavered. Just slightly. "I didn't erase you," she said, setting down an invitation. "I just made a judgment call." "A judgment call?" I repeated, incredulous. She sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "Your father always wanted this family to be taken care of. Ethan has a future to think about. A wedding, a home. And I don't?" My voice came out sharp, cutting through the air. "Sweetheart," she said, that same patronizing tone slipping into her voice. "You'll understand when you have kids. Sometimes, as a parent, you have to make tough choices." I laughed bitterly. "This wasn't a tough choice. It was a crime." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic." I turned to Ethan, who still looked entirely unfazed. "And you just went along with this?" He shrugged. "Mom said you wouldn't mind?" I stared at him in disbelief. "I wouldn't mind?" He finally set his phone down and rolled his eyes. "Look, man, I deserve this. I'm starting a family. You don't have those responsibilities yet." I felt something snap inside me. "You deserve it?" I repeated. "Dad worked his whole life to make sure both of us were taken care of, and you think you're entitled to my half just because you're getting married?" Ethan scoffed. "It's just money, dude. You'll be fine." I turned back to my mother. "You forged a legal document," I said coldly. "You stole from me. And you think I'm just going to let that slide?" For the first time, she looked slightly nervous. "I didn't steal anything," she said carefully. "I just reallocated it to where it was needed." "Right," I said, nodding. "Then you won't mind explaining that to my lawyer." Silence. Her face paled. Ethan sat up straighter. "Whoa, wait, lawyer?" I picked up the folder and turned to leave. "I'm done talking," I said. "You'll be hearing from him soon." As I walked out the door, I heard my mother call after me, her voice rising with panic. "Wait, let's talk about this." I didn't stop. Because there was nothing left to talk about. I barely made it to my car before my phone started buzzing. My mother. Then Ethan. Then my mother again. I ignored every call. They weren't calling because they felt guilty. They were calling because they were caught. By the time I arrived at Mr. Jensen's office, I was more determined than ever. I wasn't just here to ask for help. I was ready to fight. Jensen didn't waste time. As soon as I sat down, he handed me a cup of coffee and got straight to business. "I did some digging after you left," he said. "And I found something interesting." I leaned forward. "What?" He turned his monitor toward me. "Your father's original will was filed properly. It named you and Ethan as equal beneficiaries. But this new version? It's full of inconsistencies." I narrowed my eyes. "Like what?" Jensen pointed at the screen. "First, the signature. It looks similar to your father's handwriting, but not identical. We can get a forensic analyst to confirm if it was forged. A cold chill ran down my spine. Second, he continued, the notary who signed off on this. They've been investigated for fraud before. It's likely your mother found someone willing to play along. I exhaled sharply. So, she knew what she was doing? Jensen nodded. She didn't just adjust the will, she rewrote it entirely, cut you out, and made herself the sole inheritor. That's fraud. And if we prove it in court, she won't just have to give the money back, she could face criminal charges. I let that sink in. I had come here to fight for what was mine, but I hadn't fully grasped just how bad this was. This wasn't just about money. This could ruin her. And then came the hardest question. Jensen leaned back in his chair. Are you ready for that? I hesitated. It would be one thing to take legal action and reclaim what was rightfully mine. But my mother, who had raised me, despite everything, could actually go to jail for this. And I knew exactly how she would spin it. I was just trying to help the family. How could my own son do this to me? I'm your mother. I swallowed, gripping the edge of the desk. Yeah, I said quietly. I'm ready. Jensen nodded. Then we moved forward. He pulled out a thick document and slid it toward me. The first step is sending a formal notice. This will demand that she return your share of the inheritance and revoke the fraudulent will. If she refuses, we take her to court. I didn't even hesitate. I picked up the pen and signed the paperwork. There was no turning back now. The legal notice was sent the next morning. Jensen made sure it was airtight. There was no room for negotiation, no loopholes to exploit. My mother had 48 hours to respond before we escalated to a full lawsuit. I didn't have to wait long for her reaction. That afternoon, my phone exploded with messages. Mom, how could you do this to your own mother? Mom, I was only trying to do what's best for the family. Mom, please, just talk to me before you make a mistake. Then Ethan chimed in. Ethan, dude, seriously? A lawyer? What is wrong with you? Ethan, you're ruining our family over some money. Let it go. Ethan, Mom is crying right now. I hope you're happy. I let out a humorless laugh. Now she was crying? Not when she forged the will. Not when she stole my inheritance. Only when she was caught. I didn't reply. An hour later, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking exhausted and red-eyed like she'd been rehearsing the perfect heartbroken mother act. Sweetheart, she started, her voice thick with emotion. Can we please talk? I crossed my arms. There's nothing to talk about. Her lips trembled. You don't have to do this. We're family. I leaned against the doorframe. Funny. You weren't worried about family when you took my inheritance. She flinched. I never meant to hurt you. I shook my head. You didn't think about me at all. That's the problem. Tears welled up in her eyes. You don't understand what it's like to be a mother. I had to think about your brother's future. He has a wife now, soon he'll have kids. He needed the money more than you did. I stared at her, dumbfounded. So, because I'm not married yet, my future doesn't matter? She pressed her hands together, pleading. I know it looks bad, but I was just trying to do the right thing. Please, if we go to court, the whole family will fall apart. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. You should have thought of that before you broke the law. Her expression darkened, the tears vanishing as quickly as they had come. Are you really willing to destroy this family over money? She asked, her voice sharp now. I exhaled slowly. No, I said, staring her dead in the eye. You destroyed this family the second you forged Dad's will. Her face twisted in anger. Fine. If you want to be selfish, go ahead. But you'll regret this. I didn't even blink. We'll see. Then I shut the door in her face. She banged on it a few times, shouting something I didn't bother listening to. But after a while, the pounding stopped, and I heard her car drive away. I leaned back against the door, closing my eyes. It was done. There was no turning back now. Next stop, court. The next morning, the real fallout began. Relatives started calling, Aunts, uncles, even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda, sweetheart, do you really want to put your mother through this? Uncle Ray, look, I get that you're upset, but can't you just forgive and move on? Cousin Sarah, Ethan told us everything. You're really suing your own family? It was clear my mother had spun the story her way, painting me as the greedy, heartless son tearing the family apart over a little money. But I wasn't backing down. I sent the same response to all of them. Ask Mom why she changed Dad's will. Ask her why she forged my signature. Then tell me who the villain really is. Most didn't reply. A few made excuses. Only one, my Uncle David, texted back. I had no idea. Do what you have to do. At least someone understood. But as the court date drew closer, the pressure only grew worse. And I knew the worst was still to come. A week before the court date, my mother made one last attempt to stop everything. She showed up at my apartment again, but this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan was with her, looking annoyed, as if this was just an inconvenience for him. My mother, on the other hand, had her desperate face on. The same one she used when she wanted something. Let's be reasonable, she started, forcing a smile. There's no need for this to go to court. I folded my arms. Then give me back what's mine. She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a check. It wasn't for the full amount, not even close. This is what we can afford right now, she said, her voice sugary sweet. It's a fair compromise. I glanced at the check and laughed. You stole hundreds of thousands from me, and you think a fraction of that will make me walk away? Ethan scoffed. Dude, you're blowing this way out of proportion. I turned to him. Would you be saying that if your share had been stolen? His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I looked back at my mother. No deal. I'm not settling. Her mask finally slipped. You're making a mistake, she snapped. If you do this, you'll be cutting yourself off from this family forever. I met her gaze without flinching. You already did that when you forged Dad's will. I opened the door. See you in court. She stormed out. Ethan followed, muttering something under his breath. As I shut the door, I felt it, the moment I truly stopped caring what they thought of me. Now, it was just about justice. And I was going to get it. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not just in temperature, but in the way everything felt so detached, so clinical. It wasn't a family matter anymore. It was a legal battle. My mother sat across from me, looking small and fragile, playing the part of the misunderstood mother just trying to help her children. Ethan sat beside her, arms crossed, scowling like a child denied a toy. But none of that mattered. Because today, the truth was coming out. Mr. Jensen laid out everything. The forged signature. The notary with a history of fraud. The financial record showing the inheritance money being funneled straight into Ethan's wedding fund. My father's real will, which had been altered illegally. The judge listened carefully. My mother's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had only acted in the best interest of the family. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Mrs. Carter, Jensen said, are you saying your son voluntarily gave up his inheritance? She hesitated. Well, not exactly, but... Jensen slid a document in front of her. Then explain why his forged signature appears here. Silence. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stared at the table. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Carter, you do understand that this is fraud, correct? My mother finally looked shaken. I didn't take my eyes off her. She knew. She had always known. When the judge spoke again, her words were final. This court finds that the inheritance was stolen from the plaintiff. The fraudulent will is voided, and all assets are to be restored immediately. My mother gasped. Ethan's mouth fell open. We had won. But the damage was done. As I left the courtroom, I knew one thing for certain: there was no going back. And I was okay with that. Winning in court felt good, but it wasn't the kind of victory that came with celebration. It was the kind that came with silence. The court ordered my mother to return my full share of the inheritance. But since she had already spent a huge chunk of it, she was forced to sell assets, her car, parts of her retirement savings, and even the house she and Ethan had been living in. Ethan called me a traitor. He sent text after text, ranting about how I had ruined his life, and how I took away his future. I didn't respond. Relatives who once pressured me to keep the peace suddenly had nothing to say when the truth came out. Some stopped speaking to me altogether. Others, like my Uncle David, reached out, admitting they had no idea how deep the deception went. As for my mother, she played the victim to anyone who would listen. She sent me a final message. "Mom, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed this family. I was only trying to do what was best." I stared at the text for a long moment before replying with the last thing I'd ever say to her. "Me, you destroyed this family the moment you chose greed over honesty." I just exposed the truth. Then I blocked her number. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weeks after the trial were strangely quiet. No more calls, no more texts, no more guilt trips. My mother and Ethan had finally accepted that I wasn't going to back down, and without any more ways to manipulate me, they disappeared from my life. At first, it felt empty. For years, I had been caught in their web, constantly making sacrifices, constantly expected to understand why my needs were less important than Ethan's. Now that it was over, I had to figure out what came next. So, I started rebuilding. With my rightful inheritance restored, I didn't go on a spending spree or try to get revenge. I did exactly what my father would have wanted. I invested in my future. I paid off debts, put money aside for a home, and started making real plans for myself. Plans that didn't involve cleaning up after my family's mistakes. For the first time in my life, I was thinking about myself. And it felt good. What happened to them? My mother had to downsize. Without my father's savings to lean on, and with most of her money gone, she moved into a smaller apartment. She still tries to play the victim with distant relatives, but fewer people are buying into her act now. Ethan's wedding? It still happened, but not the way he imagined. Without my stolen inheritance, he had to scale back. No extravagant venue, no five-star honeymoon. His fiancée's parents covered most of the costs, and from what I heard, he wasn't exactly thrilled about it. Some family members cut me off completely. I didn't fight it. If they were willing to ignore blatant fraud just to avoid drama, then they weren't people I needed in my life anyway. Was it worth it? People asked me that sometimes, whether fighting my own mother in court was worth losing my family. And the truth is, I didn't lose a family. I lost people who only valued me when I was useful to them. I lost a mother who saw me as an afterthought. I lost a brother who felt entitled to what was mine. And I gained something much more valuable: self-respect. I will never let anyone treat me like that again. And if my father were still here, I know he'd be proud. Because in the end, I honored his wishes, even when the rest of the family didn't. And that's the only thing that matters.